So, welcome everybody to this new seminar on global development. This is the second part of the series. We had the first one 1 month ago, more or less. So today we will have two parts. The first part is going to be with Mervi, that will present about her work, and then we will have the second part that will be like a workshop style with Santi, Santi Martinez, who is working in Inter-Cultur here in the same office where I was in ACCEPTABILITY. I have some interesting projects in global development, especially in the field of education and women power. So maybe there is not something a little more applied, but how like people can start doing things in global development. So first of all, thanks everybody for being here. And in the middle, we will have a time for coffee. And after the event, also we want to hang around and meet the other people that has come. We will have time to meet each other and talk.
Yes. And we start with Mervi. The focus is still very much on development, but today we focus on education and educational projects. And Mervi has a very broad experience on this. He has been working in several countries, with several organizations, with education. Today he will mostly talk about her research, I guess, in Peru and girls' rights education. But let's give a big hand.
Okay, I hope you hear me well. Unfortunately, I am not able to hear you that well, but the host told me that it is only my problem and not yours, so I hope that you can hear me well. And I don't really know how many of you are there. Can you please, host, could you message me if you hear me well? Yes, okay, perfect, because I can't hear anything. So I'm not sure how many of you are there, and also this platform is not familiar to me, so I wasn't sure really how to use this, and that's why I haven't prepared anything very interactive. But please interrupt me at any moment. You can ask questions. Unfortunately, as I said, I cannot hear you well, but I'm sure the host can forward the questions in case you want to interrupt me. So I will share you my screen and tell you a little bit about myself and what I will be talking about today. Let's see. I hope you can see that.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so I'm sure I have been presented somehow. My name is Mervi Hakoniemi, and I have been working in education-related development cooperation for several years, mainly in Latin America, at least for the past 10-12 years. So I have been living for a long time in Peru, and I have also been working in Ecuador and in Bolivia. I have been working in UNICEF, for instance, and also in Save the Children, and I have also been coordinating development cooperation projects for Caritas Finland in Bolivia. And for the past few years, I have been actually working in education expert and also continuing in some tasks in development cooperation. And then I have also been doing my doctoral thesis. And I will not directly talk about my thesis today. I have done both my master's thesis and my doctoral thesis that I'm doing right now. I have done it on education in Peru. So naturally, many of my examples are from there. But I will talk a little bit more in general about gender equality and girls' rights to education. But yes, let's start. The first picture here, you see it from the Andean region, from Peru. It is an indigenous group that I was working with Save the Children. most of the educational projects that we work with were with indigenous populations, and that is also one of the reasons why I talk more in general about equality, not only in terms of gender, but also in terms of other dimensions of equality, such as for example, ethnic group or social background or etc. So there are several indigenous groups in Peru. Actually, at the moment, there are 52 recognized indigenous groups, and they are the most vulnerable groups that have most difficulties in attaining quality education. So first, to mention something that has been stated by the United Nations Committee for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. So education has been defined as the primary vehicle by which economically and socially marginalized adults and children can obtain the means to participate fully in their communities and lift themselves out of poverty. And I wanted to bring out this statement here because I know that afterwards you will have the speech or the seminar by Santi on poverty. And of course, education and poverty are very, very closely related. And gender inequality in work is closely related to inequality in education. So less education you have, lower paid work, unpaid work, you have unpaid work, and also undervalued positions in the work life. And often that is also related to the gender. So across the world, women are generally in the lowest paid work, and globally, actually, they earn about 24% less than men. So if we talk about, in Finland, we often talk about these 80 cents that are equivalent to the men's €1. So that would be 20% less of earnings, but globally the situation is even worse actually, and the women earn only 76% of what men earn. And if we have the current progress of improving the equality, it would actually take 170 years for us to reach equality in the gap of economic attainment. But yes, let's go forward. So we are talking about education today, and educating girls and women brings economic revenue on both personal and household level. And later we will also see that it's not only personal and household level, but it's also national level. So by education, women can gain agency and control over their own lives. Education allows them to take decisions for themselves and also for their family. Education increases female income, as we saw, and it also enlarges the workforce in general. So women are often not part of the formal workforce in the society. For once, because it's not often culturally acceptable for women to work, and on the second hand, because they have no schooling so that reach possibilities to get a paid job. And education allows women for better position for herself and in the labor market. And on the other hand, if a woman is educated, she is also aware of her rights as an employee, and she tends to have interests and abilities also for personal self-development. And one interesting figure by World Bank is actually from 2002 already, but it's still valid, is that one additional school year can actually increase women's earnings by up to 20%. So by only 1 year of education, you can earn 20% more. Then this is a traditional African proverb that I wanted to bring here because it is closely related to our topic. And this proverb was actually publicly first said by James Quadir, who was a Ghanaian young man who was noticed to be very, very intelligent and very capable in his studies. And he was sent to United States for college higher level studies. And only in few years he earned several master's degrees and doctoral degrees. And after that, he was sent back to Africa. And this was actually he was born in the end of the 19th century, and he was sent to United States in the beginning of the 20th century. So already more than 100 years ago. And he earned these several degrees, and he was noticed to be very, very capable. And also, already at that moment, it was thought in the society that we need to help the developing countries somehow to improve their education. So there was an expedition, a research expedition sent from the United States to research African continent, several different countries, and James was sent with them. And in Ghana, he first publicly said that if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a whole nation. And he stated this already in the 1920s in order to promote co-education. So in order to promote women's right for higher education. And what is interesting is that this happens in the 1920s. But if we see the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative in 2010, almost 100 years later, we still have the same message. So the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative has stated that education expands social and economic opportunities and promotes participation for both boys and girls. Girls' education, on the other hand, has cascading effects on the family, on the community, and on the nation. So it has this very, very expanding effect in comparison to educating only boys. So let's see a little bit what are the benefits of educating a girl. So we have stated this in general, but how can we prove that this is true? So I have prepared this chart here of different kinds of benefits of gender equality in education. And we can see, for example, in the left side that it states reduction in fertility and more informed and conscious parenting. So an educated mother tends to feel the need for fewer children and takes more conscious decisions concerning her children and changes her childcare models. So, of course, I am not saying this against motherhood or having children. I am mother myself, and we must have the right to have children, but we must also have the right to be informed what it means for us to have them when we want and to be conscious and know how to raise them. On the other hand, improved sexual health. So an educated woman is more informed about her sexual health, also her sexual health rights, and she can access contraceptive methods. Then we have reduction of maternal mortality. So when a woman has for these sexual health services, and when she is educated, she can more easily make use of these services. And this can improve her maternal health, and it can also improve the health of the baby. So this reduces the complications in the childbirth. And there we have in the down, there is a part where it says reduction of infant mortality. So educated women enjoy safer pregnancies and safer childbirth. Then on the other hand, we have more education for children over there on the top. And this means that additional years of mother's education increases about 30% of the expected schooling for the children. So 1 year of mother education gives 1/3 of a year additional education for the child. Then we have down there Where shall I go next? We have, up there, reduction of child marriages. So when the child is educated, we know that the daughters of these educated women are more likely to have delayed marriage and fewer children, or to decide themselves for their children. Then we have in the over there improved risk, down in the middle, improved risk reduction and safety at community level. So especially in the developing countries, there are often many types of economic and natural disasters and risks in the society. So an educated woman has more possibilities to have awareness of these risks and to have resilience in the case of crisis and disasters. And this converts the societies also more resilient to disasters. Then on the other hand, down there we have positive effects of the economy at household level. So we already mentioned this beforehand, that improvements in the household income are often used to increase female income. And then on the other hand, a little bit more upwards, we have positive effects on the economy at societal and national level. So an educated woman has more earnings and can aspire to a better salary. And this stimulates her incorporation into the labor market in the society. And let's have one more reason or justification. So there on the right, you can see agency and improved gender equality. So an educated woman makes decisions and participates in the society, making it also more equal and also claiming for her rights and for her children's rights. So that is the complete, like the comprehensive effect of educating equally both genders. Then let's look fast a little bit about the barriers to female education. We will talk about these a bit more in detail later, but I will state them now here briefly. So poverty is one of the biggest reasons for as a barrier to female education. So majority of world's poor are women, and that is why it makes it so difficult for them to access into education. So of course it is like this vicious circle that they become poor because they don't have education, but also they cannot access education because they are poor. Then on the other hand, there's lots of social values and parental preferences. So it is not often socially acceptable to send women to education because they have to, for example, perform household chores. And that's why it may be a parental preference. It is more priority to send boys into school than girls. Then we have inadequate school facilities. They may not support education for both genders. Then we often have a shortage of female teachers, and this is especially true in the countryside, in the rural areas. And the less female teachers there are, less girls get into school. And then on the other hand, there are gender bias in curriculum. And on the one hand, we have formal national curriculum. And then on the other hand, we have hidden curriculum, which is performed by the teachers in the classroom through their different pedagogical practices. We will also talk a little bit more about this later. So let's first look a bit about the legal background, the legal instruments that have promoted equal education. So as you can see there on the left side, all kind of started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in 1948, United Nations declared that everyone has right to education, and education shall be free and directed to the full development of the human personality. And this is such a powerful tool that actually we would not need any of these later legal instruments, later laws, conventions, covenants, etc. But we have noticed that girls' equal education, or the equal education for both genders, or for different kinds of population or groups, is not reality. So that's why we have started drafting more specific legal measures. So, for example, in the 1960s, there were several legal measures taken or drafted. For example, Convention Against Discrimination in Education. So if we already say in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that everyone has right, then nobody should be discriminated. But since the situation did not change, we have been obliged to draft all these additional laws and legal instruments. So the Convention Against Discrimination in Education proclaims that every person has the right to education. Then the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights emphasizes even more that everyone must have a universal right to education without discrimination of any kind. And then we start taking into consideration different kinds of population groups. For example, there on the in the up right-hand corner, you can see the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention. So this is from 1948 to 1990s. But if we think of the development cooperation arena, or how would you say, the sector, in the 21st century, probably the most known instruments are the development goals. So first, in the year 2000, we had the Millennium Development Goals. And there were several different, actually 8 different MDGs, and 2 of them were are specifically related to the topic that we are talking about today. So the goal number 2 was achieving universal primary education, and it has target 2A, which is ensuring that by 2015, children everywhere, boys and girls, will be able to complete full course of primary school. Then on the other hand, we have goal number 3, which is promoting gender equality and empowering women. And at that point, in the title of the goal, women were specifically included, because it was seen that women are the ones who experience more discrimination. And the target 3A says eliminating gender disparity in primary and secondary education, preferably by 2005 initially, and then in all levels of education no later than 2015. So the goals were supposed to be reached by 2015. And indeed, there was a lot of progress. Lots of children achieved access to education in several educational levels, but specifically in primary level. But then we saw that we hadn't been able to improve the situation enough. And that is why Sustainable Development Goals were drafted in 2015. And they were a lot more specific, a lot more descriptive. There are, of course, also several more. So there is a huge amount of Sustainable Development Goals in comparison to Millennium Development Goals. But also, again, we have 2 different goals that are specifically related to the topic of today. So we have number 4, which is quality education, and we have number 5, which is gender equality. And now we are taking into consideration gender in general, not only women. Of course, before also men were included, but we were seeing that women and men are discriminated different ways. So we were starting to analyze the situation more qualitatively, and also that brought into the scene the fact that we noticed that yes, children access school, but they do not learn. Universal education was almost achieved, and it was achieved in many parts of the world. But even when children went to school, they didn't learn. And we started to talk about this global education crisis, which meant that children go to school, but it's not worth anything because they don't learn. They don't learn to write, they don't learn to read, and they don't learn basic mathematical equations. And on the other hand, we want to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. So we still specify that women are discriminating. And there are certain kinds of bottlenecks. For example, women might access basic education. It was very general in many countries that there was a universal education in basic education. But in the secondary school, women started dropping out. So they didn't achieve this right to education when they were older. Or even if they accessed secondary education, women didn't progress into higher education. And on the other hand, if they progressed to higher education, they still did not achieve the high paying labor. So this cycle of education kept on going. And globally, about 2/3 of countries in developing countries have actually achieved gender parity in primary education. But however, this progress has been very, very uneven between regions. It has been very uneven between regions and between geographical areas inside the countries. There are certain population groups inside the countries. As I mentioned in the beginning, there are, for example, indigenous peoples who are often very, very much discriminated in education. And even if they have access to education, they don't achieve the same learning outcomes as the majority of the population. And for example, in the case of girls, what happens very often is that they continue being those who are deprived of education, especially in early education and in secondary level, as I said. And there are several reasons for this, and one of the most important reasons is teenage pregnancy. So even when in Latin America, girls' assistance to education has actually surpassed the boys' assistance in the primary level. In the secondary level, they drop out because the teenage pregnancy is such a huge problem, such a huge social problem. On the other hand, there are also boys that drop out from school in the secondary level, but the reasons are different. So in case of boys, it's mainly because of the maintenance reasons, because they need to start working. They enter the labor sector. So they start working, for example, in mines, in agriculture, or for instance, as street vendors. I wanted to show you still a little bit more about how to analyze education quality more in a qualitative way, in more detail. And Katarina Tomaszewski, who was United Nations first special rapporteur on education, on the right to education, has created this 4A's approach into how to define quality in education. And these are different interrelated characteristics that allow us going beyond the usual information that is focused on the offer, and to put more emphasis on the demand of education. So more child-centered approach into quality of education. And first A that Katarina Tomaszewski mentions is access. So access to education is often conditioned by geographical barriers that are differently experienced by girls and boys. So geography is something that affects the right to education very, very clearly in many developing countries. For instance, in secondary schooling, in the countryside, secondary schools tend to be very sparsely related, and the traveling to educational institutions is often a big obstacle for the girls to get into the school. So the parents of the girls often restrict their access to school due to the distance to the educational institution and because the long journeys can be dangerous for the girls. So especially the teenage girls on the countryside, as the schools are located far away from where they live, the parents are afraid of sending them to the school, for example, because of the risks concerning rape or violence. And this is why many families decide that they will prioritize the schooling for boys. Then we have the second A, which is availability. So even if the education is formally free, there are several financial costs that are associated with school that may make it impossible for the children to enter schooling. So there are costs such as school uniforms, they can be books, they can be stationery, transportation costs, etc. And on the other hand, many families expect children to work for their maintenance or for the family maintenance, and it may be a considerable economic burden to send the children into school. Then on the other hand, schools are highly gendered environments. So we should have adequate gender sensitive spaces in schools for both boys and girls to be able to access school. So for example, we need more policies to ensure the security to access to school. And for example, the provision of sanitary services, for example, bathrooms must be adequate. So we need adequate sanitation facilities for the children, and often this means that we need separate bathrooms so that the girls are motivated to go into school and that the parents are motivated to send them into school. And actually in Peru, for example, this is one of the biggest hinders of education, of equal education, the fact that the schools do not have adequate sanitary services. And it's one of the most called for measures in order to improve education. Then we have the next A, which is acceptability. And this means that even though we are providing education, we don't often provide education that is acceptable. So the quality of teachers could be awful. These teachers that might not have the adequate degree for teaching might not have materials. And even if they have the adequate degree, even if they are qualified, they may not have received the appropriate training in terms of gender-sensitive education. So less than 15 countries in the world actually have gender approach in the curriculum, in the formal curriculum. And even, for example, in the case of Peru, gender approach was included in curriculum, in the basic education curriculum in 1917. But even today, after several years, conservative groups are protesting against this approach because they don't feel that it embraces the traditional idea of family. Then beside the formal curriculum, we have the hidden curriculum that I already mentioned. So the prevalence of hidden curriculum also hinders the girls' right into education. So hidden curriculum means these different practices that are used by the teachers in the classroom that are not gender sensitive. For example, it reinforces the discriminator role of girls in the classroom. They may use certain methodologies. They may, for example, think that women do not serve for mathematics, or that boys are more intelligent and more capable in certain subjects, or they may promote different type of participation for girls and for boys. And the last A is adaptability. So we may provide the education services. We may even have thought them throughoutly. We may even have good access for all the children. The schooling may even be free for everybody. But we still need to adapt the education into the needs of the population, of the child population. So there are several vulnerable groups, and I already mentioned these pregnant girls who are very, very typical in Latin America. And when a girl is pregnant, she often drops out from education. So, for example, in Latin America and Caribbean, about, depending on the country, 67 or 89% of adolescent mothers or those who are pregnant do not attend school. And those who are already mothers have 2 or 3 years of less education than those who don't have children. So if we already have this social problem, this problem in the society of teenage pregnancy, then we have to make education appropriate for the population. On the other hand, if we have working teenagers, we also must have adequate education for them. So in Peru, for example, school dropout is mostly related to pressure to assume productive work, as I said before, in case of boys. Okay, then I'm not sure how do I go with that time, but let's see a little bit about how to improve gender equality in education. I don't have too much left. So as I was mentioning about the legal instrument and of the difference in approach that we have been gaining in the past years, we have noticed that instead of quantitative approach, we need to take a qualitative approach. So statistics don't really give us enough information if we only look at the numbers of children at school. We need to observe the reality more in detail and more qualitatively. What is the type of education that we are providing? So the focus has changed, and then we also have to change analysis, and we also have to change the measures that we are taking in order to battle the problem. And the differences are more qualitative and more related to the dimension of acceptability. So, for example, this hidden curriculum, we need to see how children are treated in the classroom and what kind of education they receive. I have here as a tip one documentary. It is a video that is called Escuela de Silencio. I'm not sure if any of you speak Spanish. Unfortunately, I didn't find it in English, but if you look it in YouTube, you will clearly see how children are treated differently based on their gender in the classroom. So, for example, here we have a picture from the Andean region in Peru of a boy writing on the whiteboard in front of the classroom. So it is most often the boys who are asked to write in the classroom. On the other hand, in societies, girls are often used as helpers, for example, of the teacher. So the girls and boys, depending on their gender or their assumed gender, they have different kind of roles in the school environment and in the classroom. And not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So here I have one last picture from the Andean region. And if you observe the picture, at first it might not ring any bell. It might not surprise you. But then when you start to look at it more closely, you see that the girls are sitting beside. Almost all of the girls are sitting beside the yard, beside the patio, watching. There is one girl in the yard playing with the boys, playing the ball. I think they're playing volleyball. So this is already discriminative situation. The boys have the possibility of practicing their social skills in the play, practicing their physical skills, practicing their leadership skills, their communication. And the children, the girls are only sitting beside, observing how the dynamics of the society function. So I will leave you with this picture, and in case you have any questions, I will be happy to answer, and then I will give my word to Santi afterwards.
Thank you, Mervi. Do you have questions?
I have one question. I was thinking, should we take 1 minute that everybody talk with the person next to you, what you found interesting, what you would like to ask, if there's anything? So talk with the person next to you, and then 1 minute I can ask, but you may help me to get some questions.
So discuss with the other person and by pairs of 3 people.
Could you, I'm not sure if somebody was asking something because I don't hear you well, so could you please type in case there's any questions? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, Mervi, what we are going to do is people will be discussing a bit for 1 minute and then they will present questions so that they activate a bit.
Okay, I think I understood you. So you are giving a few minutes for conversation, for talking together, interacting, and then in case there's some questions.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's going to be easier for them to recapacitate about what they have learned.
Yes, definitely.
I think we need to maybe we can
So, questions? So I know one. If those who have a question would like to present something, you can put the hand up. No. So I know. Santi. Okay.
I guess so. About the pregnant mothers and their right to education, because I was just today reading an article about girls in Kenya, and it said that around 20% of the girls between 15 and 19 in Kenya actually get pregnant. And I was really shocked by this information, and now when you talk about how many of those girls end up dropping school. So I was just interested, like, what can be done that this would be changed, like what kind of changes there should be that it would be more adaptive for those girls to continue, like in the society or in the school or in the families, or what would be done for that teacher.
Did you got it, Mervi?
I think so. I think it was Aina who was asking about teenage pregnancy, and she had been reading an article from Kenya with,
Yes.
I think, 20% of teenage girls being pregnant. Yes, currently the teenage pregnancy is still in the worst level actually in Africa. But what is interesting in that in Africa, the situation has been slowly improving. In Peru at the moment, and Latin America is similar in different countries, the level of teenage pregnancy is 13%. But what is very worrying is that Latin America is the only region where the situation hasn't been improving. So even though there has been lots of measures, we haven't been able to reduce teenage pregnancy. There are, of course, lots that is being done. The society is still very traditionally formed in terms of dynamics, which isn't helping. And also, the society is very conservative. So, for example, sexual education is not often allowed. So, it is one of the great topics in the curriculum that was approved in Peru in 2017, which obliged schools to give education on reproductive health and rights, and many parents actually themselves were against it. So it is still kind of a taboo. On the other hand, the facilities is one thing that I was mentioning. So the girls should have their, or both genders should have their own bathrooms, which would prevent some of the possible cases of rape and abuse. On the other hand, we should provide different type of schooling. So if the schools are far away from the village and the girl needs to go by walking long distances to the school, it is more risky for her to go to school. Then on the other hand, there is the cultural effect. So in many, especially rural areas, the role of the woman is still inside the family, or is still taking care of the family. So as said in the beginning, women aren't often part of the formal labor market because they have these unpaid tasks at home, and they are expected to be wives and to be mothers. So it is not socially banned to be a mother at early age. In a rural area in the Andes, it might be perfectly normal to be a mother at the age of 12. And actually, if a child in the remote regions is raped, often the parents take the decision of obliging the girl to get married with the man that raped her. Of course, the situation can be the other way around also, but it is very complicated because it is a shame for the family to have a child without a father. So there are several measures that, of course, we should take, but I personally think that the information is the most important, and not only training the teachers and the children, but also the parents. So we must have these very, very comprehensive awareness raising campaigns so that whole society understands that girls could have different roles in the society and could take agency in different manners.
I think the next question by Santi was more or less related to this, no?
Yeah, so my question is more, I mean, I don't know if it's like a question, but there's in this kind of like gender equality issues, there's always like also the other part, like we always talk about the educating girls, but I think there's also the other part, boys, and is there any measures are being taken to educate boys also in understanding the role of girls and women in society, so that like the discrimination like gets like also like less. Yeah. That's my question.
I'm not sure if well, I didn't understand. Thank you completely, but I think I got the idea. So you were asking about genders in general, not only girls, because of course we have to include boys. So that is something highly important. And that is something that has also changed very, very clearly in the development cooperation rhetorics. So as I said, before, in the Millennium Development Goals, we talked more about the girls' rights and the vulnerability of girls. But we have now noticed that we have to also consider the situations that are discriminative towards boys, towards both genders or different genders, and that has changed in also in the legal instruments and in the rhetoric. So in the sustainable development goals, we already take into consideration more the boys, and of course it is a problem that concerns both genders. Lately, there has been already in the past 10 years, there has been lots of awareness raising in something called new masculinities. So the fact that we don't only try to empower women, but we try to empower men also in a way that they can take different kinds of roles in the society, that it is acceptable for a dad, for example, just a simple example, to stay at home with his children, or that it is acceptable for a dad to give a hug to his children, or that it is acceptable for him to braid the hair for his girl child. So there's a very, very broad movement of these new masculinities that gives more space and a wider role for a man to be man.
Other questions? So, Mary, thank you very much. I think you have another meeting now, no, or something like that. So, thank you for your time, and thanks. That was very informative.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So now we will continue. Is Santi coming now? Right. Perfect. Coffee break.
Miten? ¿Cómo hiciste lo de la musiquilla tú? ¿Cómo hiciste tú la otra vez?
¿Me puedes poner ahí abajo? Puedes poner... ¿No sale por ahí música?
Pone videoclips.
¿Puedes poner esto en plan de fondo?
Tampoco...
¿No sale la música? ¿Por qué me salía la música? Ah, mira aquí. Era...
No settings, no creo que sea. Mira lo de outsource.
Ah, no, espera, está.
Actually, going to be in English. Do you want me to present you or? So, Santi is. There was a technical trial. So now we know that the sound is black. And so Santi is working in Inter-Cultur. I was going to say International Youth Corporation, but that's not the point. He's working in Inter-Cultur, that is an NGO that focuses mostly on excellence in education and development. I think he will be able to explain it better. So the idea is basically what Mervi has been talking about, that education is very important, both for boys and for girls for human development. But education has to be quality education. It's not enough to put children to waste time in a school. It should be like some kind of pursuit of excellence. And then it really can change society. Santi is involved in multiple projects in South America, Latin America, in Lebanon, Kenya, in Finland, and so on. So he will tell about those projects, about his work, and maybe if Santi wants to start telling a bit of how he got involved in all of those things, and how young people, for example, here, how can we contribute, or how can we do our fair share in helping to improve the world one step at a time. So without further presentation, that was good enough or not?
Very good.
Very good.
I would like to be what you were saying. I would like to be that.
Santi's much more. And I think if Santi agrees, maybe the best way of having this conversation is less class and more like a conversation. So at any point, if you have questions or comments, if this becomes more of a dialogue, I think it will be most fruitful for us and for you. So the stage is yours.
That's interesting today. We're going to talk about WhatsApp. Do you have 5 minutes? Yes. Eventually, we ended up talking about an hour about the Creation Foundation of the University of Lebanon. So let's see eventually what's going to happen. That's something that we eventually ask as part of the program. Will be one of the outcomes for our project that we do. So Inter-Cultur is, as Judy very well said, a Filipino that in the last 10, 15 years, we've been focused on the development cooperation projects. For that, we're working basically in Finland, still in Finland, and the Baltic region, but now mainly, or let's say, the main part of the budget have now around 1 million euros in development cooperation projects, out of which 800 comes from the Finnish Foreign Ministry. Projects sponsored by the ministry now in Kenya, in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. Then we do some other projects in Lebanon, also in Kenya, and also sponsored by the ministry, and in Colombia, and in El Salvador. So basically, Latin America, we started with Lebanon, Kenya, and now we expanded. What we do actually is we choose strategic partners. I call it Inter-Cultur, we are like venture capitalists of development cooperation. So we focus on institutions and we try to develop their strategic skills so that they get better. That's what we do, right? So we focus obviously on particular projects because that's what usually institutions sponsor, right? They don't ministry doesn't sponsor a particular institution, but project.